The spotlight burned against Rosalind Chen's skin like judgment itself, transforming the elegant ballroom into a theater of her shame. 600 pairs of eyes dissected her curves through midnight blue silk while she stood frozen on the auction platform, her heart hammering against her ribs so violently she wondered if the microphone would pick up its desperate rhythm. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lena Vasquez's voice cut through the whiskey-scented air with practiced precision, presenting Miss Rosalind Chen, 24 years old, artist, and completely new to our exclusive community. The emphasis on new sent a chill down Rosalind's spine. In this world of crystal chandeliers and Cuban cigars, innocence commanded a premium. Below her, men in $1,000 suits shifted in their leather chairs like predators scenting wounded prey. The bidding started before she could steady her breathing. 50,000, the number hit her like a physical blow. More money than she'd seen in her entire life, casually thrown into the air by a voice she couldn't locate in the sea of shadows and smoke. 75 came another bid, followed quickly by 100. Rosalind's vision blurred at the edges. 3 months ago, she'd been hanging her abstract paintings in coffee shops, dreaming of gallery showings and art critics who might understand her vision. Now she stood trembling in borrowed designer clothes, watching wealthy strangers purchase. Her dignity in increments that could fund small countries. The memory of her mother's latest medical bills scattered across their kitchen table burned behind her eyes. Chemotherapy sessions that cost more than most people's mortgages. Experimental treatments their insurance had denied 3 times. Mrs. Chen's whispered apology that morning still echoed in Rosalind's ears like a prayer turned curse. "I'm sorry I'm such a burden, my dear one." No. Her mother was not a burden. She was everything worth sacrificing for. 200,000, 250, 300. The numbers climbed higher, each bid another chain around Rosalind's chest. She gripped the microphone stand to keep from swaying, the metal cold and unforgiving against her palm. Carmen's voice floated back to her from their phone conversation 3 days earlier, honey-sweet with false reassurance. Some of these men just want someone beautiful on their arm for social events. It's your choice how far anything goes. Lies wrapped in silk, Rosalind realized now. In this room where money spoke louder than morality, choice was an illusion sold, to make the merchandise feel better about being sold. 400,000. The bid came from a silver-haired man in the 3rd row whose eyes had been undressing her since she'd walked on stage. Rosalind's stomach turned to ice water as his lips curved into a smile that promised things she couldn't name but instinctively feared. Lena's manicured hand tightened on her arm, a reminder disguised as support. 400,000 going once, the coordinator announced, her voice carrying across the ballroom like a funeral bell. This was really happening. In 30 seconds, she would belong to that man with his hungry eyes and proprietary smile. Her art degree would become meaningless, her dreams irrelevant. She would be purchased, owned, expected to perform whatever services he deemed worthy of his investment. 400,000 going twice. Rosalind closed her eyes and thought of her mother's face, pale against hospital pillows but still managing to smile when the nurses weren't looking, still asking about Rosalind's paintings, still pretending the morphine drip wasn't the only thing standing between her and agony that would break lesser women. 500,000. The voice cut through the ballroom like a blade through silk, deep and controlled and carrying such absolute authority that even the auctioneer paused. Rosalind's eyes snapped open, searching the shadows for its source. He stood in the back corner where the chandelier light couldn't quite reach, a tall figure, who seemed to command darkness itself. Even from this distance, she could feel the weight of his attention like a physical touch, electric and dangerous, and somehow more terrifying than the silver-haired man's obvious hunger. "We have 500,000, Alina announced, her professional, composure cracking slightly around the edges. "Do I hear 6? Silence stretched taut as a wire about to snap. The silver-haired man's face had gone pale, his mouth working soundlessly as he stared at the figure in the shadows. Other bidders shifted uncomfortably, suddenly finding their drinks fascinating. 500,000 going once, Alina called. her voice echoing off marble columns and oil paintings of dead men who'd probably conducted similar auctions in their time. Going twice? Rosalind's pulse thundered in her ears. $500,000, enough to pay for her mother's treatment, her medications, maybe even the experimental surgery in Switzerland that offered a 20% chance at 5 more years. The gavel fell like a gunshot. Sold. As the word reverberated through the ballroom, Rosalind felt her old life die, and something entirely new and terrifying take its place. She had crossed a line she'd sworn never to approach, sold herself to. A stranger whose voice alone could silence a room full of predators. The mysterious bidder remained motionless in his corner, but she could feel his eyes on her like brands against her skin. In minutes, she would come face to face with the man who had just bought her for more money than most people earned in a decade. Her hands shook as Alina guided her off the platform, her silk dress whispering against her legs like secrets she would never be able to tell. Whatever happened next, she was no longer Rosalind Chen, the struggling artist. She was something else now, something that could be purchased and owned and used. The question that terrified her most wasn't what he would demand of her. It was why the sound of his voice had sent heat racing through her veins instead of ice. The private suite Alina led her to smelled of expensive leather and something darker. Something that reminded Rosalind of storm clouds gathering on clear horizons. Burgundy walls absorbed the lamplight like secrets, and Persian rugs muffled her footsteps as she paced the length of a room that probably cost more than her childhood home. Her reflection caught her eye in an antique mirror, and she barely recognized the woman staring back. The midnight blue dress transformed her into someone sophisticated and mysterious, but her eyes betrayed her terror. She pressed her palms against the silk, trying to steady her breathing before he arrived. The door opened without a sound. Sebastian. Romano stepped into the room like he was stepping into his own boardroom, commanding the space with nothing more than his presence. Tall and lean with dark hair, touched by premature silver at the temples, possessed the kind of masculine beauty that belonged on magazine covers and in women's fantasies. His suit was tailored to perfection, every line designed to showcase the powerful body beneath, but it was his eyes that stole Rosalind's breath. Deep brown and intensely intelligent, they held depths that spoke of carefully guarded secrets and sorrows he would never name. When they settled on her, she felt exposed in ways that had nothing to do with the dress's revealing cut. "You're younger than I expected," he said, his voice the same deep tone that had silenced an entire room. There was no judgment in the words, only observation delivered with unsettling gentleness. Rosalind lifted her chin, fighting for dignity she wasn't sure she had left. "I'm 24, old enough to make my own decisions." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, transforming his face. From merely handsome to absolutely devastating. Indeed, he gestured toward the seating area with fluid grace. "Please, sit. Would you like something to drink? Wine, perhaps?" His courtesy caught her off guard. She had expected aggression, demands, maybe hands that took without asking. Instead, he waited for her response like her comfort actually mattered to him. "Water is fine," she managed, settling onto the velvet sofa with as much poise as she could summon. He moved to the bar with controlled efficiency, ice cubes chiming against crystal as he prepared their drinks. Even from across the room, she could feel his presence like electricity in the air before lightning strikes. "Tell me about your mother," he said without turning around. The words hit her like a physical blow. "What? Her illness? The medical bills that brought you here tonight?" He faced her with 2 glasses in hand, his expression unreadable. "Oh, I make it my business to know why people enter my world, Rosalind. Knowledge is the only currency that matters more than money." Heat flooded her cheeks. He had investigated her. Probably knew more about her desperate circumstances than she'd told Carmen. "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer," she whispered, accepting the water with hands that trembled slightly. "The treatments are experimental. Insurance won't cover them. You'd rather sell yourself than watch her die." The brutal honesty of his words made her flinch. "Don't make it sound noble. I'm here because I'm a coward who can't face losing the only family I have left." Sebastian sat across from her, close enough that she could smell his collinsu, something sophisticated and masculine that made her pulse quicken despite her fear. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Rosalind. It's doing what terrifies you, because the alternative is unacceptable. Is that supposed to make me feel better about this? I don't deal in comfort, he said, his tone going cooler. I deal in truth. And the truth is that you're here in this room because you love someone more than you love your own innocence. That makes you either very brave or very foolish. Which do you think I am? His eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her skin burn. Both. Silence stretched between them, thick with tension and unspoken expectations. Rosalind clutched, her water glass like a lifeline, trying to reconcile this composed, almost gentle man with the stranger who had bid $500,000 for her company. What do you want from me? She finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sebastian leaned back in his chair, and for the first time she saw something vulnerable flicker across his features. That's more complicated than you might think. Try me. He was quiet for so long, she wondered if he'd heard her. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made her chest tighten. I have a reputation in this city. They call me ruthless, calculating a man who takes what he wants without regard for the consequences. And they're right. His fingers tightened around his glass. But there are some things even I won't take by force, such as innocence. The word fell between them like a stone into still water, sending ripples through the charged air. You've never been with a man, have you? Shame burned through her so hot and bright she thought it might consume her entirely. How did you know? The way you move, the way you look at me, like I might devour you whole? His voice gentled. The terror in your eyes when you think about what I might demand of you? Tears she'd been holding back all evening finally spilled, over-tracking mascara down her cheeks. I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you paid for. Probably want someone experienced, someone who knows how to please you without instructions. In one fluid movement, Sebastian was beside her on the sofa, his thumb brushing away her tears with surprising tenderness. Look at me. She raised her eyes to his, expecting disgust or disappointment. Instead, she found something that looked almost like reverence. You think your inexperience makes you worthless, he said, his hand still cupping her face. But you're wrong. In a world where everything can be bought and sold, authenticity is the rarest treasure of all. I don't understand. His thumb traced across her bottom lip, and her breath caught at the contact. I don't want to be another man who takes from you, Rosalind. I want to be the one who gives you something precious in return. What could you possibly give me that would be worth $500,000? His smile was sad and beautiful and full of promises that terrified her. A choice. Every moment we're together, every touch, every kiss, it will be because you want it, not because you feel obligated to provide it. The words should have comforted her, but instead they sent panic racing through her veins. Because looking into Sebastian Romano's dark eyes, feeling the heat of his skin against hers, she was beginning to realize that obligation might have been easier to bear than desire. What if I make the wrong choice? She whispered. His hand slid into her hair, fingers tangling in the dark waves the stylist had tamed into elegance. Then we'll make it together. Before she could respond, his lips were on hers. Soft and patient, and tasting of whiskey and possibilities she'd never dared imagine. The kiss was nothing like the desperate fumbling she'd expected, nothing like the brutal claiming she'd feared. It was a question and an invitation and a promise, all wrapped in the space of a heartbeat. When he pulled back, his eyes were darker than before, filled with hunger he was clearly struggling to control. Stay the night with me, he said, his voice rough with want. Not because you have to, but because you want to see where this leads. Rosalind stared up at him, her lips still tingling from his kiss, her heart hammering against her ribs like a bird trying to escape its cage. Everything rational in her mind screamed that this was dangerous, that men like Sebastian Romano were predators who consumed innocent women for breakfast. But the irrational part, the part that had been awakened by his touch, whispered that maybe being consumed wouldn't be the worst fate in the world. She breathed, sealing both their fates with a single word that would change everything. Sebastian's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a building that scraped the belly of the clouds. Its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city that made Rosalind feel like she stood at the edge of the world. Manhattan spread below them in a carpet of golden lights, each one representing lives and dreams and secrets that would never touch theirs. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her breath fogging the glass as she pressed close to the window. "Beauty can be deceiving," Sebastian said from behind her, close enough that his warmth seeped through the silk of her dress. "Sometimes the most stunning views hide the deepest falls." She turned to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher, something hungry and protective and tinged with a sadness that seemed carved into his bones. The elegant lighting cast shadows across his features, transforming him from the composed businessman who had claimed her at the auction into something more dangerous, more real. Are you speaking from experience?" His smile was sharp as broken glass. "I've fallen further than most people even know how to climb before." She could ask what he meant. He was moving toward her with fluid grace, his hands settling on her waist with possessive gentleness. "But tonight isn't about my demons. Tonight is about discovering yours." "I don't have demons," she protested, even as her body betrayed her by melting into his touch. "Everyone has demons, Rosalind. The question is whether we're brave enough to feed them or foolish enough to starve them until they consume us." His lips found the sensitive spot where her neck met her shoulder, and she gasped at the electricity that shot through her. No one had ever touched her like this, with reverence and hunger in equal measure, like she was both precious and dangerous. "Sebastian," she breathed, not sure if she was protesting or pleading. "Tell me to stop," he murmured against her skin, his hands sliding up to frame her face. "Tell me to take you home to your small apartment and your dying mother and pretend this never happened." The words should have been easy. She should have wanted to go home, to scrub off the makeup and burn the dress and forget. She'd ever entered a world where innocence could be bought and sold like any other commodity. Instead, she found herself arching into his touch, her hands fisting in his jacket as she pulled him closer. "I can't," she whispered. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff into darkness. Sebastian's response was to lift her effortlessly, carrying her through rooms decorated with art that probably cost more than her mother's medical bills. She caught glimpses of paintings she recognized from textbooks, sculptures she'd only seen in museums. Beauty collected and hoarded like treasure in a dragon's cave. His bedroom was a study in masculine elegance that seemed designed to seduce and intimidate in equal measure. When he set her down beside the massive bed, she felt suddenly small and overwhelmed by the weight of what was about to happen. "Second thoughts?" he asked, his voice gentle despite the desire burning in his eyes. "Third and fourth thoughts?" she admitted, wrapping her arms around herself like armor. "Good. Anyone who approaches this without fear is either lying or dead inside." His fingers found the zipper at the back of her dress, but he didn't pull it down. "We go at your pace, Rosalind."
Always.
"Always at your pace." The promise in his words gave her the courage to reach up and begin unbuttoning his shirt, her fingers clumsy with nerves and want. When she pushed the fabric off his shoulders, she had to bite her lip to keep from making an embarrassing sound at the sight of him. Sebastian. Romano was built like a man who had earned his power through more than just boardroom battles. Leanne. Muscles stretched across his chest and shoulders, marked here and there by scars that spoke of violence she couldn't imagine. But it was the vulnerability in his eyes as she explored his skin that made her heart clench with something deeper than desire. "Your turn," he said, his voice rough with restraint. The zipper slid down like a whispered prayer, and the midnight blue silk pooled at her feet like spilled ink. Standing before him in nothing but lace that suddenly felt inadequate, Rosalind fought the urge to cover herself. "You're perfect," he breathed, and the reverence in his voice made her believe it might actually be true. What followed was an education in pleasure that left her gasping and clinging to him like he was the only solid thing in a world gone fluid. He mapped her body with hands and lips and teeth that marked her in ways she would carry forever, showing her depths of sensation she'd never known existed. But even as he drove her to the edge of madness, even as she called his name like a prayer, in the darkness she sensed he was holding something back. There was a careful control in his touch, a deliberate restraint that felt less like protection and more like fear. "What are you afraid of?" she asked afterward, lying tangled in sheets that cost more than her rent, her body still humming with the aftershocks of pleasure. Sebastian's arm tightened around her, but his silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Myself," he finally said, the words barely audible in the darkness. "I'm afraid of what I might do if I let myself have what I really want." "What do you really want?" When he looked at her, his eyes held depths of hunger that made her shiver. Despite the warmth of his body pressed against hers, "To keep you." The simple words hit her like a physical blow, carrying implications that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "Sebastian, you can't just keep people. I'm not something you can buy and possess, aren't you?" His hand traced the line of her jaw with devastating tenderness. "You're here in my bed wearing marks I put on your skin because I paid $500,000 for the privilege. How is that not possession?" The brutal honesty of his words made her flinch, but she couldn't deny the truth in them. She was here because he had bought her, because she had sold herself for money that would save her mother's life. That had happened between them. Every touch and kiss and whispered endearment was tainted by that transaction. "That's different," she said, though the words felt hollow. "Is it?" His thumb brushed across her swollen lips. "Tell me, Rosalind. If I hadn't bid on you tonight, if you had gone home with that silver-haired bastard in the third row, would you have let him touch you the way I just did?" The thought of those cold hands on her skin, of enduring intimate touches from a stranger, who saw her as nothing more than purchased flesh, made her stomach turn to ice. "No," she whispered. "Then what makes me different? What makes this acceptable when that would have been rape?" She stared up at him, searching for an answer that wouldn't. "Damn them both. Because I chose this. Because I wanted it. You wanted me to buy you?" "I wanted you," she admitted, the words torn from her throat like confessions under torture. "From the moment I heard your voice in that auction room, from the moment you touched my face, I wanted this. I wanted you to make me feel the way you, Jez, did." Sebastian's response was to kiss her with desperate hunger, like he was trying to consume her very soul. When they broke apart, both breathless, his eyes held something that looked dangerously like hope. "Then stay," he said, the words carrying the weight of every unspoken promise. "It's not just tonight, but longer. Let me take care of you, of your mother's medical bills, of everything that brought you to that auction in the first place." The offer was everything she had dreamed of and everything she feared. Financial security, an end to the crushing weight of medical debt, a man who looked at her like she was precious instead of disposable. But underneath the sweetness lay a poison that would slowly kill everything good between them. "You want to make me your kept woman," she said, the words bitter on her tongue. "I want to make you mine in every way that matters." The possessive growl in his voice sent heat racing through her veins even as alarm bells clanged in her mind. This was how it started, how women lost themselves in the gilded cages built by men who confused ownership with love. But as Sebastian's hands roamed her body again, as he whispered promises and endearments that sounded almost like love, Rosalind found herself wondering if being owned by the right man might not be the worst fate in the world. She was still trying to decide when the sound of his phone, buzzing against the nightstand, shattered the intimate spell between them. Sebastian ignored it, his mouth trailing fire down her throat, but the caller was persistent. "Answer it," she breathed, some instinct warning her that the call was important. With a curse, he reached for the device, his expression darkening as he read the display. "I have to take this," he said, sliding out of bed with predatory grace. "Business emergency."
Yes.
As he disappeared into the adjoining bathroom, his voice too low for her to hear the actual words, but carrying a tone that raised every nerve ending in her body, Rosalind stared up at the ceiling and wondered what kind of business Sebastian Romano was conducted at 3 a.m, and why the sound of his voice on the phone filled her with the unshakable certainty that everything was about to change. Ed from beneath Egyptian cotton sheets pulling on Sebastian's discarded shirt to cover her nakedness. The silk of her auction dress lay crumpled on the floor like a discarded skin, and seeing it made her stomach twist with memories of the previous night. Not just the pleasure he had shown her, but the conversation afterward. The way he had spoken of keeping her like she was a rare bird to be caged for his pleasure. The voices led her to his study, where the door stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, she could see Sebastian pacing behind an enormous mahogany desk, his hair disheveled, and his expression harder than she had ever seen it. A man in an expensive suit sat across from him, files and photographs spread across the desk's surface. "The transfer needs to happen today," the man was saying, his tone carrying the weight of ultimatum. "Our investors are getting nervous about the delays." "Tell them to be patient," Sebastian replied, his voice deadly calm. "Quality merchandise requires careful handling. Merchandise." The word hit Rosalind like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. She pressed closer to the door, her heart hammering against her ribs as the pieces began to fall into place. "Speaking of merchandise," the man continued, shuffling through the photographs, "the Chen girl was an inspired choice. Virgin, desperate, beautiful enough to attract premium bidders. She fetched top dollar in Dubai." Ice flooded Rosalind's veins. She gripped the doorframe to keep from falling as the man's words registered. Dubai, premium bidders. The language of human trafficking dressed up in business terminology. "The buyer is particularly interested in her artistic background," the man went on, oblivious to the fact that Rosalind's world was crumbling just beyond the door. "Apparently he has specific fantasies about corrupting creative types. He's willing to pay triple the usual rate." Sebastian stopped pacing, his hands bracing against the desk as he leaned forward. "And you're certain the transition will be clean? No complications? No trails leading back to us? As clean as all the others? We've been running this operation for 3 years without so much as a suspicious glance from the authorities. Auction house provides perfect cover, and the women come willingly. By the time they realize what's really happening, they're already halfway across the Atlantic." The photographs scattered across the desk came into focus as Sebastian picked up one of them. And Rosalind's heart stopped completely. It was her own face staring back at her, captured during the auction preparation, along with what looked like dozens of other women. Young women, all of them beautiful, all of them wearing the same expression of terror and desperate hope that she remembered from the preparation room. "The other girls from last night," she whispered, so quietly she could barely hear herself. The confident redhead who had told her everything would be fine. The nervous blonde who had clutched her purse like a lifeline. They were all there in those photographs, all of them merchandise to be sold to the highest bidder. "When do we move her?" Sebastian asked, and the casual way he discussed her fate made bile rise in her throat. "Tonight? The buyer wants her untouched. By anyone but you. So consider yesterday's performance your final payment for services rendered. After tonight, she becomes someone else's problem. Untouched by anyone but you." The words echoed in her mind as Sebastian's careful seduction replayed, itself through a new and horrifying lens. Every gentle touch, every whispered promise, every moment when she had thought he saw her as more than just another transaction had been a lie. A performance designed to make her compliant, to make her trust him enough to stay voluntarily until the real transaction could be completed. She had been right the first time. He was a predator, and she was prey that had walked willingly into his trap. "There's one complication," Sebastian said, his voice carrying a note she couldn't identify. "She's become attached, more than I anticipated." The other man chuckled, and the sound made Rosalind's skin crawl. They always do. That's what makes them so valuable. The buyers love women who think they're in love, who'll cling and cry and beg. Makes the breaking process so much more enjoyable for them. Inside, Rosalind shattered at those words, something precious that she would never be able to repair. The part of her that had believed in fairy tales and happy endings, the part that had looked at Sebastian and seen a prince instead of a predator, crumbled into dust that tasted of ashes and betrayal. Sebastian was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was so soft she had to strain to hear it. "What if I wanted to keep her?" The question sent hope and terror warring in her chest. Did some part of him actually care for her, or was this just another layer of the game? "Keep her?" The other man sounded incredulous. Romano, you know the rules? We don't keep merchandise. We sell it. Besides, you've never shown interest in permanence before. What makes this one special? She's different, Sebastian said, and there was something raw in his voice that made her want to believe him despite everything she had heard. Innocent in ways that go deeper than just her body. When she looks at me, she doesn't see the monster everyone else sees. She sees something worth saving. And you're willing to throw away $3 million for that fantasy? $3 million. The amount made her head spin. She was worth $3 million to whatever monster waited for her in Dubai. Sebastian was considering keeping her instead of collecting the payment. I can make $3 million in a week, Sebastian replied. But I'll never find another her. For a moment, Rosalind's heart lifted with something that might have been hope. Maybe the connection between them had been real. Maybe he did care for her enough to choose her over the money. Then the other man spoke again, and her hope died a brutal death. Think with your head, not your dick, Romano. You've gotten attached to merchandise before. Remember the Russian girl 2 years ago? You thought you wanted to keep her too, until the buyer in Tokyo offered to double the price. You took the money then, just like you'll take the money now. It's who you are. Sebastian's silence stretched so long that Rosalind began to hope he would refuse, choose her over the profit she represented. When he finally spoke, his voice was empty of everything that had made her believe in him. You're right. Schedule. The transfer for tonight. The words hit Rosalind like bullets, each one tearing through whatever remained of her heart. She backed away from the door on silent feet, her hand pressed to her mouth to muffle the sob that threatened to escape. He had chosen the money, just like he always did. Moving with desperate quiet, she gathered her things and dressed in the midnight blue silk that now felt like a shroud. The elevator ride to the lobby passed in a blur of tears and rage, her reflection in the polished doors showing a woman she barely recognized. Gone was the innocent girl who had walked into that auction. In her place stood someone harder, someone who had learned in the cruelest way possible that fairy tales were lies told to make the nightmare easier to bear. The morning air cut through her dress like ice, but she welcomed the cold. The emptiness inside her chest, where her heart used to be. She had enough money in her purse for a cab ride home, back to the tiny apartment where her mother waited with questions Rosalind could never answer. But as she stood on the sidewalk outside Sebastian's building, watching the city wake up around her, she realized she had one advantage Sebastian didn't know about. She had heard everything, and she was going to make him pay for every lie. Every false promise, every moment she had believed his performance was real. He thought he owned her, thought she was just another piece of merchandise to be bought and sold. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The police station on Fifth Avenue was bustling with morning activity when she walked through the doors. Still, wearing her auction dress and the scent of Sebastian's cologne on her skin, the desk sergeant looked her up and down with weary eyes that had seen too much of humanity's darker impulses. I need to report a human trafficking operation, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. I have names, addresses, and photographs. The sergeant's expression sharpened immediately. Ma'am, that's a serious allegation. Are you sure you want to proceed with this? Rosalind thought of the photographs scattered across Sebastian's desk. Of all the women who had trusted the wrong man and paid for it with their freedom, she thought of the redhead who had tried to comfort her, who might already be on a plane to whatever hell awaited her, I'm sure. 2 hours later, she sat in an interview room across from Detective Maria Santos, a woman whose kind eyes couldn't quite hide the steel beneath. Santos had listened to Rosalind's story without judgment, taking notes and asking clarifying questions that showed she understood exactly how deep this conspiracy ran. You realize what you're risking, Santos said, sliding a legal document across. The table. Men like Sebastian Romano don't take kindly to being betrayed. He has resources, connections, ways of making problems disappear. He already made me disappear, Rosalind replied, signing her name with steady strokes. The woman I was before last night doesn't exist anymore. The question is whether the woman I am now is going to let him get away with it. Santos smiled, and it was sharp as a blade. Then let's make sure he doesn't. The raid on Sebastian's building was scheduled for that evening, timed to coincide with whatever transfer was supposed to take place. Rosalind would be wearing a wire, playing the role of the trusting victim for as long as it took to get the evidence. They needed to bring down the entire operation, It was dangerous. It was probably stupid. But as she sat in the back of an unmarked police van, watching Sebastian's building through a monitor, yes, she felt more alive than she had since walking into that auction room. He had taught her that everything had a price. Now she was going to show him the cost of betraying the wrong woman. Her phone buzzed with a text. Message from an unknown number, and her blood turned to ice water when she read it. I know what you did this morning. Beautiful. Come home now, and we can discuss this like civilized people. Run, and I promise you'll regret it for whatever brief time you have left to regret anything. Sebastian knew. Somehow, despite all the precautions the police had taken, he knew exactly what she had done and where she was. The van suddenly felt like a trap instead of protection. And Rosalind realized that her war with Sebastian Romano had only just begun. The police van exploded into chaos as Detective Santos barked orders into her radio, her face grim as she processed the implications of Sebastian's message. Outside the tinted windows, pedestrians walked by in blissful ignorance of the war being waged in their midst. How did he know? Rosalind whispered, staring at the text message that had turned her blood to ice water. Romano has people everywhere, Santos replied, checking the wire taped to Rosalind's chest. Lawyers, judges, cops, who've been bought and paid for. We knew this was a possibility. Then why did you let me do this? Santos met her eyes with unflinching honesty. Because sometimes the only way to catch a monster is to use yourself as bait. And because you're the first person with enough evidence and enough courage to take him down. Another text arrived. This one containing only an address and a time. Midnight. A warehouse in Queens that probably hadn't seen legitimate business in decades. He wants to meet, Rosalind said, her voice steadier than she felt. Absolutely not. Santos's tone brooked no argument. We stick to the original plan. Full SWAT backup, coordinated strike on his penthouse. And what happens to the women being transferred tonight while we're following protocol? Rosalind challenged. How many more Rosalind Chens disappear into trafficking rings because we played it safe? The detective's silence was answer enough. I'm going, Rosalind said, the decision crystallizing in her chest like steel. With or without police backup, you'll be walking into a trap. I've been walking through traps my entire life, at least. This time, I know where the teeth are. 4 hours later, Rosalind stood outside a warehouse that looked like it had been abandoned since the Industrial Revolution. Broken windows stared down at her like dead eyes, and the scent of rust and decay hung in the air like a funeral shroud. The wire under her clothes felt inadequate, paper shield against the monsters that waited in the darkness. Sebastian emerged from the shadows with the fluid grace of a predator. But something in his posture was different. Confident businessman. From the auction was gone, replaced by something raw and desperate and infinitely more dangerous. You came, he said, and she caught something that might have been relief in his voice. Did I have a choice? His laugh was bitter as broken glass. You've always had a choice, Rosalind. That's what made you so dangerous. Dangerous to whom? To me. The admission seemed to cost him something precious. Do you have any idea what you've done? Stopped you from selling me like cattle? Saved me from becoming something I swore I'd never be again? The words hit her like a physical blow, carrying implications she couldn't process. What are you talking about? Sebastian ran his hands through his hair, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked truly vulnerable. The trafficking operation, the auctions, all of it. It wasn't my idea. Don't lie to me. I heard everything. You heard what? I needed them to hear. His eyes found hers in the darkness, and the pain she saw there was so raw it made her chest ache. I've been working undercover for 3 years, Rosalind. It's a federal task force deep cover assignment. It's the auction house, the buyers. All of it was designed to identify and shut down the largest human trafficking ring on the East Coast. The words hit her like bullets, each one dismantling the carefully constructed narrative she had built around his betrayal. That's impossible. I heard you agree to sell me, because Victor was getting suspicious. If I had refused, blown my cover, dozens of other women would have disappeared before we could shut the operation down. His voice broke slightly. Including you. He had backup plans, other buyers. At least with me, You were safe. Safe? The word came out as a bitter laugh. I was merchandise to you. You were never merchandise to me, he said, and the fierce intensity in his voice made her take a step back. You were the woman who made me remember what I was fighting for. You were the one who made me want to be worthy of the way you looked at me. Then why didn't you tell me? 'Cause I couldn't risk it. 'Cause deep cover means trusting no one. Not even the people you love. The last word hung between them like a confession and a condemnation. And because I knew that once you learned the truth, you'd hate me for putting you through it. Rosalind stared at him, her mind reeling as she tried to process the possibility that everything she thought she knew was wrong. Prove it. Sebastian reached into his jacket and she tensed, half expecting a weapon. Instead, he produced a badge and a phone, both of which he offered to her with hands that trembled slightly. Agent Sebastian Romano, FBI. Check the badge. Call the number. My handler will confirm everything I've just told you. The badge felt real beneath her fingers, heavy with authority and legitimacy. But it was the look in his eyes that convinced her. The desperate hope and terror of a man who had just revealed his deepest secret to someone who held his heart in her hands. The other women from the auction, she whispered. Safe. All of them. The raid happened 2 hours ago. Victor and his entire network are in custody, along with enough evidence to put them away for life. His voice gentled. Your cooperation this morning was the final piece we needed to move against them. Relief flooded through her so suddenly she nearly collapsed. Redhead, who had tried to comfort her, the nervous blonde with her death grip. On her purse, all the women whose faces had haunted her since she'd seen those photographs. They were safe. But the text message you sent, she said, trying to hold on to her anger even as it slipped through her fingers like water, wasn't from me. Victor had contacts inside the police department, people who warned him about the investigation. He sent that message from my phone after his people grabbed me from the penthouse. Sebastian's jaw tightened. He's here, Rosalind. This isn't just a meeting. It's his contingency plan. As if summoned by their conversation, slow clapping echoed through the warehouse. Victor emerged from the shadows with 2 armed men flanking him, his expression carrying the cold satisfaction of a man who had finally cornered his prey. Touching, he said, his accent thick with mockery. Agent Romano, so dedicated to his cover that he was willing to sacrifice the woman he loves. How noble. Let her go, Victor. Your fight is with me. Oh, but she's the perfect leverage, don't you think? The innocent artist who brought down my entire operation. I think she deserves to see exactly what happens to people who interfere with my business. One of the gunmen raised his weapon, and Rosalind saw death in his eyes. This was how it ended, not with the fairy tale she had dreamed of, but with bullets. And betrayal in a warehouse that smelled of rust and broken dreams. Sebastian moved before the gunman could fire, throwing himself between Rosalind and the weapon with desperate courage. The shot echoed through the warehouse like thunder, and she watched in horror as the man she loved crumpled to the concrete with blood spreading across his shirt like spilled wine. Sebastian, da-da-da. She dropped to her knees beside him, pressing her hands against the wound in his chest as his life leaked out between her fingers. The wire, he whispered, his voice already growing weak. Tell them, tell them Victor's here. Tell them to come now. She screamed into the wire, hoping Detective Santos was listening, praying that help would arrive before she lost him forever. Victor laughed at her desperation, the sound echoing off empty walls like the laughter of demons. How romantic. Star-crossed lovers dying together in the dark. It's almost poetic. The warehouse doors exploded inward as SWAT teams poured through. Every entrance, their shouts, and the thunder of boots on concrete, drowning out Victor's curses. The next few minutes passed in a blur of gunfire and chaos, but Rosalind barely noticed. Her entire world had narrowed to Sebastian's face, to the way his breathing grew shallower with each passing second. Stay with me, she whispered, her tears falling onto his cheeks like rain. Don't you dare leave me now. Not when I finally understand. Understand what? His voice was barely audible above the chaos surrounding them. That love isn't something you buy or sell, it's something you choose, even when the price is everything you have. Sebastian's smile was beautiful and heartbreaking and full of everything they might have been. I chose you the moment I heard your voice in that auction room. I chose you every day since then, even when it meant betraying everything I thought. I believed about myself, then choose to stay alive. I choose to fight. Choose to build something real with me, instead of dying in this godforsaken place. He tried to answer, but the words dissolved into blood on his lips. The paramedics pushed her aside with professional efficiency, working over him with desperate skill as they fought to save a life that had become more precious to her than her own. 6 months later, Rosalind stood in the gallery where her paintings hung like windows into a soul that had been shattered and rebuilt stronger than before. The reviews called her new collection haunting and brutally honest. But she knew they were really looking at the visual representation of a heart that had learned the difference between being owned and being loved. Sebastian entered the gallery. On legs that still moved carefully, the bullet wound having healed but left him forever changed. He wore a simple suit instead of the designer clothes that had marked him as predator, and his eyes held peace where there had once been shadows. "May the critics love you," he said, joining her in front of a painting that captured the moment she had realized love was a choice rather than a transaction. "The critics don't matter. Only one person's opinion matters to me." "And what's his opinion?" She turned to face him fully, drinking in the sight of him alive and whole, and miraculously hers. "He thinks I'm worth choosing every day for the rest of his life." Sebastian's response was to pull a simple ring from his pocket, no ostentatious diamond or designer setting, just a band of white gold that caught the gallery lights like captured starlight. Then maybe he should make it official. Maybe he should. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, it felt like the closing of one story and the beginning of another. They had been forged in darkness and betrayal, tested by violence and the impossibility of loss, but they had emerged into light stronger than either could have been alone. The price of love, Rosalind had learned, wasn't measured in money or sacrifice or the willingness to endure pain. It was measured in the courage to choose someone every day to build something beautiful from the broken pieces of who they used to be. To trust that what they had created together was worth more than anything that could be bought or sold. As Sebastian's arms closed around her in the gallery filled with paintings of their journey from darkness into light, surrounded by strangers who saw only art where she saw salvation, Rosalind finally understood that some things were truly priceless. Love was the only currency that mattered, and they were rich beyond measure. The end asterisk. Like this video if the story touched your heart, subscribe for more emotional tales, and share with someone who believes in the power of true love. And let us know in the comments. We love connecting with our global community of romance lovers.